Darren, thank you very much. Can you just tell us a bit about this reaction to President Biden's address in New York? Because I think it's concerning times on the world stage at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, really concerning indeed. We've not really heard as strong a rhetoric, let me put it that way, from the Russian President Vladimir Putin through the course of this war. It does seem to keep ratcheting it up with every month, with every difficulty, clearly, that Russia is facing in Ukraine. A pretty punchy speech, though, it must be said, from President Biden here at the United Nations. Talked about how Russia and Putin's claims that he had to act because he was threatened, or Russia was threatened. Joe Biden argued that no one threatened Russia and no other country, not least of all Ukraine, sought war or conflict with Russia, saying that it was an outrageous act and that the world should see it for what it is, and said it broke those key tenets of the United Nations, if you like, though in many regards, of course, Patrick, the United Nations is somewhat limited in what it can do, not least of all because Russia is on the UN Security Council, and that means that it's got an effective veto in all of this. So, you know what, in many regards, we're seeing this pretty angry, pretty forthright, pretty united response, I would say, from the Western world in what we heard from President Putin, overnight here in New York in the early hours of the morning for you guys. I suspect, though, they're just going to have to wait and see what this mobilization actually means for the conflict in Ukraine. NATO today suggesting they've not seen any evidence of changes to Russia when it comes to its nuclear capabilities. And we have to remember, even with this mobilization, which is starting immediately from today, and even with the ratcheting up of armaments, which Russia has also announced, none of this stuff's going to take or happen anytime soon. It is going to take a while, some even suggesting possibly up to a year for it to really actually have any effect on the conflict in Ukraine. And, you know, God knows where we'll be in a year's time. Elsewhere here at the United Nations, we're hearing from a whole range of world leaders, not least of all from our Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's expected to speak at around 9 p.m. local time tonight, so that's in the wee small hours for you guys back home. And I suspect it will be a pretty similar message from the British Prime Minister, a real show of solidarity, and we'll also see that when she actually meets with the US President Joe Biden in the next hour or so here in New York. Ukraine undoubtedly top of the agenda, just like it was actually when she met with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen a little bit earlier on this morning here in New York, in which they talked about how there was this common thread of unity when it comes to Ukraine, that they agreed that Putin's recent calls to mobilize parts of the population were a sign that Russia's invasion is failing, that it was a statement of weakness. That was the conclusion from the European Union and indeed the UK in that joint statement. So the focus here, very, very much on Ukraine, though, as I say, the United Nations, somewhat impotent in its response. Lots of condemnation, very little action, it must be said. While for you guys back home, clearly the focus is domestically ahead of that not spring statement, we're in the autumn, aren't we? The autumn statement, the mini budget, the fiscal event, whatever you want to call it. Tomorrow we're going to learn much more about those tax cuts that many economists and much of the country have been waiting to hear about for the last couple of months.
Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much. Darren McCaffrey, there, our political editor from New York, at the epicentre of international relations at the moment. He did allude to the words fiscal event that appears to be happening on Friday. I always think that makes it sound a bit like a seizure. But coming up...